ValveTime.net.
Hi, and welcome to our third Spotlight exclusive covering Android ports of Valve titles. Following the recent release of Half-Life 2 Episode 2 to the Android-based NVIDIA Shield TV device earlier this month, we thought now would be an excellent time to jump back half a year and delve deep into the files of the Half-Life 2 Episode 1 port released back on December 15, 2014, just like we did for the initial porting of Half-Life 2. Like the Half-Life 2 and Portal ports, which we spoke about on previous episodes of ValveTime Spotlight, the Android port of Episode 1 was worked on by NVIDIA, not Valve, who used a variety of older test files and maps to ensure their own port retains the features required for both the original game and the source engine itself. This is where things get interesting, as NVIDIA's developers are seemingly rather messy and have left some of these files behind in every single one of their ports. By bringing the game files over to a PC, we've been able to open the various hidden test maps on a Windows version, allowing us to take a sneak peek at their contents. This time, we came across 8 different test maps, most of which are indistinguishable from the versions we showed off in full during our Half-Life 2 video. The only real differences are present in map DevTest 01B, which no longer features the soda can and trash bin sequence used for Half-Life 2. Instead of having to find a soda can and help a citizen cross the wooden bridge, Alex will follow you from the previous sequence and request you find a fuse box in order to switch the lights on. Like the citizen, Alex will then follow you across the wooden bridge into the next new sequence, which replaces the animation and sequence testing from the Half-Life 2 build. This new version features a darkened room with a trio of zombines spawning one at a time, leaving the defenseless player tester to wait for the zombines to kill themselves with a grenade or for Alex to dispatch them with her new animations. Both of these short and simple sequences were likely implemented to test Alex's extensive range of new or expanded abilities introduced in Episode 1, such as following the player to map objectives, hacking various machinery, and fighting zombines and antlions in melee combat. The map then continues as normal before eventually transitioning into the Half-Life 2 set-piece test maps we previously showed off. While the rest of the basic test maps are identical to those found in Half-Life 2's files, an additional 5 maps were also found. Much in the same vein as the DevTest High Poly map featured in our original video, these 5 extra maps serve no real purpose as test files and are instead likely relics of earlier parts of the game's original development. That said, it would appear that these leftover files are actually related to the development of Episode 2 rather than Episode 1. This may seem a tad unlikely given the games were finished and released a year and a half apart from each other, but it's more believable than you may think, as both titles were at least partially developed at the same time. 4 of the 5 maps that contain the prefix Style Guide feature no gameplay and appear as very early versions of scenarios later used throughout Episode 2. These include Style Guide Riverbed and Style Guide Riverbed 2, which both appear similar to the first map of the Freeman Pontifex chapter. Style Guide Mining, which looks very similar to the original map of the chapter This Vortal Coil, and Style Guide Antlion Tunnel, which stands as a more cramped version of This Vortal Coil's second map. The Riverbed maps are by far the largest and most interesting maps, featuring large dried-up shores, tall train bridges, a small industrial facility, a climbable pile of fallen rocks, and dense forests. Despite only featuring basic 2D and 3D trees, the maps are also interesting for showing off 2 minor visual features never used in any of the Half-Life 2 games. These include scrolling cloud textures and, more interestingly, rain particles and sound effects, which only really featured during the Source Particle benchmark from 2006, originally released at GDC 2007. While reading up on the benchmark's inclusion of rain, the in-game background also caught our eye. Previously thought to show the opening map from Episode 2, we noticed the blurred images actually feature an updated version of Riverbed only with greener, higher quality trees. This could mean Riverbed and Riverbed 2 were at one point set to appear within the particle benchmark itself before being cut for whatever reason. Riverbed and the tighter, less interesting Riverbed 2 also uses a mountainous skybox not seen in any retail game, which is noteworthy for not featuring the solitary snowy peak used as a waypoint throughout Episode 2, likely predating its existence by several months. Elsewhere, Antlion Tunnel functions as the smallest of the 4 maps, taking place exclusively within a small mining tunnel and the start of some Antlion caves, much the same way the sequence appears in Episode 2. Rather than leading into the normal series of straightforward tunnels, the map features rough terrain and a small pool with its own underwater tunnel. Alongside numerous Antlion grubs used to highlight the cave's lighting, a pair of unkillable Antlion workers are used as traditional animation cyclers, moving from one animation to the next when hit with a weapon. This is repeated in mining, where 6 different regular antlions are used as animation cyclers. despite looking similar to the final version, this map actually features some noticeable differences, including a larger upper platform, no Antlion warning lights, operating table, or weapons, a damaged lift, and less lighting. The most interesting change, however, involves how the player enters the map, as the cave hole used in Episode 2 doesn't actually exist, instead making the player walk through a large steel corridor to drop down into the room. The lower platform for this entrance still exists in the final game and even features the same set of stairs on the right side. It just wasn't clear why it would even exist, but I guess now we know. As the style guide prefix we mentioned earlier suggests, all 4 of these maps were likely created to be only viewed from a number of select perspectives, giving level designers a point of reference regarding what kinds of textures, effects, color palettes, locations, tones, and themes should be present in specific maps. This is also evident by the lack of any gameplay features whatsoever and the blatant map cutoffs on the edge of the skybox. We've left the most interesting and unusual map for last, however, as a map known as Wasteland Test definitely stands as the odd one out. Upon loading the map, the player is placed into a small stone outpost within a crude, unfinished desert-like map. The player is then instructed via on-screen text to collect 6 petrol canisters and place them within receptors in order to fuel an unseen chopper. Pitted with 4 allied combine turrets, 3 mounted guns, 4 rebels, stacks of ammunition, and a gunless buggy, the player must defend against endless waves of antlions and combine soldiers while traveling around the map to return the canisters to the base. A trio of striders also make an appearance at the rear of the map, except they only begin moving or shooting should you shoot them in the face. It's worth noting that there's actually no realistic way to kill the striders using the limited ammo provided in the map, unless you sit and throw hundreds of grenades, that is. Once you secure all 6 canisters, the player is told to defend until a few extra repairs are made to the non-existent helicopter, which are then never completed. The map will continue to spawn antlions and soldiers until the player is killed, and we're not sure what the intended outcome of the map actually is. Featuring extremely simplistic geometry, floating rocks, limited props, unfinished scripting, and no actual conclusion, the existence of Wasteland Test is very puzzling. The presence of Wasteland in the file title leads us to believe this map may date back to an early build of Half-Life 2, given the prominence of the Wasteland location in earlier storylines. This would also explain why certain key values are missing from the map once we decompiled it, as it's possible Wasteland Test was only ever intended to be used as an early in-house version of Half-Life 2 sometime around 2003, making it at least partially incompatible with any of the final released versions. It's worth noting Wasteland Test previously appeared alongside the DevTest maps within the Half-Life 2 Android port. We just didn't cover it because Barnes never told Nick about its existence, regardless of what he might say. Since we can't really give you a playthrough of the non-functional style guide maps, we'll instead leave you with a round of the Wasteland Test map, or as far as we get before it crashes or the map's incomplete scripting stops working. Hopefully you've enjoyed this quick look behind the scenes of Half-Life 2 Episode 1's most recent port. To get more details on the DevTest maps we mentioned at the very start of this episode, be sure to check out our previous ValveTime Spotlight exclusive episodes for the Half-Life 2 and Portal Android ports before subscribing to our YouTube channel and following us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.